Portville, New York, on October 3rd, 2014. In a two-story house on Maple Street, Dana Thompson sat by the window, her mind heavy with thoughts she couldn't share with anyone. It was close to 8:15 p.m., and her husband, Mike, was still at work, managing his night shift at a nearby warehouse. To those who knew her, Dana was the perfect wife, a caring mother to her two young children, and an active member of the community. But tonight, her heart pounded with a secret that cast a shadow over her life, a secret that she had vowed to bury but could no longer ignore. Just two houses down, Officer Ryan Hale, a 39-year-old police officer, was wrapping up a long day at the station. Known around town as the dependable cop who often went out of his way to help others, Ryan seemed to have it all: a stable job, respect from his peers, and a family that adored him. But beneath his calm demeanor was a restlessness, a feeling that his life was slipping through his fingers. He had grown tired of his quiet life, the long hours at work, and the endless routine. The connection between Dana and Ryan had started innocently. In early September, they crossed paths during a neighborhood barbecue, exchanging polite smiles and light conversation. Dana, 36, felt a spark she hadn't felt in years. Their conversations grew longer, filled with a chemistry that neither of them dared to acknowledge. They laughed over shared frustrations and bonded over the small, hidden discontentments of their lives. For both, these fleeting moments offered a sense of escape, a thrill that filled the empty spaces of their daily lives. But on October 10th, things changed. Ryan arrived home late, the sound of his police radio echoing faintly as he entered his driveway. As he looked up, he saw Dana standing alone on her porch, her gaze distant. He hesitated, but the pull was undeniable. Steeling himself, he walked over, pretending it was just a casual chat between neighbors. Yet that night, as they stood under the dim porch light, the air between them grew thick with unspoken words. Neither wanted to cross the line, but the temptation was impossible to resist. As October rolled on, their brief encounters became riskier. They would meet in secluded corners of the neighborhood or exchange glances at the grocery store, careful to keep their interactions unnoticed. On October 28th, around 9:30 p.m., Dana sneaked out of her home and Ryan met her at the abandoned barn on the outskirts of town. The barn was old, creaking in the wind, surrounded by towering pines that cast dark shadows. They spoke in hushed tones, their whispers blending with the night sounds, aware of how close they were to being caught, yet unable to turn back. Back home, Mike started to notice changes in Dana. She had become distant, often staring off into space, her mind somewhere else. Dana's laughter, once so easy and bright, now felt forced, as if she were trying to mask something she couldn't hide. Mike didn't question it at first, chalking it up to stress, but by November 1st, he couldn't ignore the growing tension. Dana would spend hours out of the house, claiming she needed space, yet returning with an uneasy silence that lingered. Ryan felt it too, the thin line they were treading. He was a police officer, sworn to protect and uphold the law, yet here he was, caught in a trap of his own making. On November 2nd, at exactly 10 p.m., Dana and Ryan met once more, this time in a secluded park at the edge of Portville. The cold wind rustled the fallen leaves as they sat together, neither saying a word, each aware of the boundaries they were crossing. But that night, Ryan reached for her hand, a move that felt both forbidden and thrilling. Dana's heart raced as she looked into his eyes, and at that moment, any thoughts of consequence faded. Back at her home, as the clock struck midnight, Dana's phone buzzed with a single message from Ryan. Tonight meant everything, but we need to be careful. She read it over and over, her mind swirling with excitement and dread. She knew they were playing with fire, but part of her didn't care. The following days were a haze of hidden messages and stolen glances. They both knew that any slip could bring everything crashing down, yet the thrill of secrecy kept pulling them deeper into a web they couldn't escape, one that would soon unravel in ways they never expected. As November crept along, the town of Portville was preparing for Thanksgiving. The streets were adorned with early holiday lights, and the air grew colder by the day. But for Dana and Ryan, the season brought no comfort, only a deepening tension that weighed heavier with each passing day. Their affair had become a dangerous routine, filled with stolen moments and whispered promises. The thrill was intoxicating, yet every time they parted, the fear of exposure loomed larger, casting a shadow over their brief moments of joy. On November 8th, around 8:45 p.m., Dana found herself lying in bed, wide awake as Mike slept soundly beside her. Her mind raced, and the temptation to see Ryan grew unbearable. She knew it was risky, that the smallest slip could ruin everything, but her heart overpowered her reason. She reached for her phone and texted him, "Can we meet? I need to see you." Moments later, her screen lit up with his reply, "Meet me by the bridge in 10. Dana crept out of the house, careful not to make a sound. The bridge was a desolate spot on the outskirts of town, hidden by thick woods and often deserted at night. As she arrived, she saw Ryan's silhouette against the pale glow of his car's headlights. The two exchanged a quick, desperate embrace, the quiet of the night amplifying their hushed voices. "We're getting too close, Dana," Ryan murmured, a hint of worry in his tone. "Someone's going to notice if we're not careful." Dana nodded, understanding the risk but feeling powerless to let go. "I know, but it's like I can't help myself," she whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. They shared a lingering look before he reluctantly let her go, watching her disappear back into the darkness. The next morning, Dana's nerves were frayed. Mike had been observing her closely, his questions growing more frequent, his tone tinged with suspicion. He noticed how distracted she was, how quickly she glanced at her phone when she thought no one was looking. At dinner, he watched her, a slight frown creasing his face as he tried to piece together the puzzle of her recent behavior. By November 12th, Dana and Ryan's affair had reached a fever pitch. That evening, as they met at their usual spot, Ryan expressed his growing fear. "Dana, I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. I'm a cop, for God's sake. If anyone finds out—" His voice trailed off, his words heavy with dread. Dana's eyes filled with a desperate resolve. "But I don't want to lose this, Ryan. You're the only thing keeping me sane right now." She reached out, her hand finding his, and in that moment, neither wanted to face the harsh reality that loomed ahead. But as they parted that night, a chill settled in Ryan's bones, a feeling that told him they were hurtling toward an inevitable disaster. The turning point came on November 15th. That night, around 9:30 p.m., as Dana was getting ready for bed, she heard her phone buzz. Expecting a message from Ryan, she quickly glanced at the screen, only to see Mike's reflection in the mirror, watching her from the doorway. "Who are you texting this late?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes narrow with suspicion. Caught off guard, Dana fumbled with her phone, the guilt flashing across her face for a brief moment. It's just a friend," she stammered, trying to brush it off. But Mike wasn't convinced. "A friend? At 9:30 p.m., he questioned, his voice now cold. Dana forced a laugh, but Mike's eyes stayed on her, a tension building in the room that left her breathless. For the first time, Dana felt the full weight of her actions. Her husband was beginning to piece together her lies, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the truth emerged. She lay awake that night, her heart racing as she realized the life she'd known was slipping away. The thrill of her affair with Ryan was now tainted with fear, and as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything she cherished was hanging by a thread. November 17th, 2014, dawned cold and grey over Portville. Dana woke with a knot in her stomach, knowing the fragile balance she'd been maintaining was slipping from her grasp. The night before, Mike had gone to bed without a word, his silence cutting deeper than any confrontation. She could feel his suspicion growing, like an invisible hand tightening around her, leaving her unable to breathe. But it was too late to turn back now. Every attempt to distance herself from Ryan only seemed to strengthen their bond, pulling her deeper into a life she knew couldn't last. That afternoon, Dana's mind wandered as she prepared lunch for her children, her hands moving automatically while her thoughts drifted back to Ryan. The secrecy had been thrilling at first, but now it felt like a weight pressing down on her, trapping her in a web of lies she had spun herself. She glanced at the clock, 3:45 p.m. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. "I need to see you tonight. We need to talk." Her heart raced as she read his words, sensing an urgency she hadn't felt from him before. She quickly replied, agreeing to meet him at their secluded spot by the lake after sunset. Later that evening, Dana found herself pacing the living room, nerves buzzing as the clock edged closer to 9 p.m. She told Mike she was heading out to pick up a few groceries, a lie she hoped sounded casual enough to slip past his suspicion. Without another glance, she slipped out the door, feeling the chill of the night air as she hurried to her car. The lake was deserted, the only sound the quiet rustling of leaves in the breeze. Ryan was already waiting, his figure barely visible under the pale moonlight. As she approached him, she noticed the tension in his stance, the way he looked away, his jaw clenched, as if bracing himself for something difficult. "We can't keep doing this, Dana," he began, his voice low but filled with conviction. "I love being with you, but this is tearing me apart. Every time I look at my wife and kids, I feel like I'm betraying everything I've worked for." His words hung heavy in the air, their truth undeniable. Dana's face crumpled as she tried to respond, her emotions a tangled mess of guilt, fear, and longing. "I know, Ryan," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes, "but I don't know how to let go. Being with you, it's the only time I feel alive." They stood there, staring at each other in silence, both knowing the right thing to do, yet unable to bring themselves to do it. Just then, a car's headlights swept across the trees, illuminating them briefly before passing. Dana flinched, the reality of their dangerous situation crashing down on her. "We need to be careful," she muttered, her voice shaky. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This has to end, Dana. We're risking everything, our families, our lives. We have to make a choice." The weight of his words settled over them both, a reminder of the reality they had been trying so hard to avoid. With a reluctant nod, Dana agreed to part ways, though the thought of leaving him filled her with despair. They shared a long, final embrace, each silently mourning the connection they'd found, but couldn't keep. As she walked back to her car, her mind reeled with the implications of their decision, the painful reality that their time together had come to an end. When Dana returned home, the house was dark, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She was about to head upstairs when she noticed a light on in the living room. Her pulse quickened as she stepped into the room to find Mike sitting on the couch, waiting for her. He looked up, his eyes heavy with a mixture of exhaustion and hurt. "Where were you, Dana?" he asked, his voice calm but icy. She opened her mouth, fumbling for an answer, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched between them, each second a condemnation she couldn't escape. "I know something's going on," Mike continued, his gaze unwavering. "You've been distant, sneaking out at odd hours, acting like a stranger in your own home. Who is he, Dana?" His question cut through her, piercing the walls she had built around her secret. She realized in that moment there was no point in lying anymore. Her voice shook as she spoke, barely able to meet his gaze. It was a mistake, Mike. I didn't mean for it to happen." The truth spilled out, fragile and broken, each word a small release from the guilt that had been eating away at her. Mike's face twisted with pain as he absorbed her confession, the reality of her betrayal settling over him like a dark cloud. "A mistake?" he echoed, his voice filled with disbelief. "You risked everything we had. For him?" Unable to bear the anguish in his eyes, Dana looked away, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Mike," she whispered, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "I never wanted to hurt you." For a long time, Mike sat in silence, his mind racing as he tried to process what he had just heard. Finally, he stood, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his heartbreak. "I need some time to think," he said quietly, before heading toward the door. Dana watched him go, her heart breaking as she realized that the life they had built together was slipping through her fingers, leaving her alone with the ruins of her choices. As the door closed behind him, Dana sank to the floor, her mind numb with regret. She had thought she could keep her secret hidden, that the excitement of her affair would be enough to sustain her. But now, as she sat alone in the empty house, she realized the true cost of her actions. The life she had cherished, the family she had fought to keep intact, was gone, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The days following Mike's departure passed in a blur for Dana. She barely ate, barely slept, her mind weighed down by the shattered remains of her life. Every room in the house reminded her of the life she'd destroyed, each memory tinged with the knowledge that she'd thrown it all away for a fleeting thrill. Guilt clung to her, suffocating, but beneath it was a hollow emptiness she couldn't shake. The realization that she'd lost everything she cared about hit her with every tick of the clock. On November 22nd, just a few days before Thanksgiving, Mike returned to the house. His face was gaunt, eyes hardened by sleepless nights and heartache. He hadn't come to forgive or reconcile, but to collect his things. Dana watched him silently from across the room, her throat tight as she struggled to find words to fix what she had broken. "Is there anything left to say?" he asked, his voice hoarse and filled with finality. Dana opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. She knew apologies wouldn't mend the pain she had caused, wouldn't heal the broken trust. Mike gathered his belongings, his movements slow and deliberate, as if each step were carving the end of their marriage into stone. Finally, he left without another word, closing the door softly behind him. Dana collapsed onto the couch, feeling the crushing reality of her loneliness settle over her. 2 days later, on the night of November 24th, Dana sat alone in her living room, watching the shadows dance across the walls. The silence in the house was deafening, pressing in from all sides. She had thought she'd reached rock bottom, but the emptiness she now felt was something far worse. In a moment of desperation, she picked up her phone and typed out a message to Ryan. She needed someone, anyone, to take away the ache, even if just for a little while. But Ryan's reply was colder than she'd expected. "Dana, this isn't going to work. We went too far and it's over. Don't contact me again." Her hands trembled as she read his words, the finality hitting her harder than she'd anticipated. She was truly alone, abandoned by both the man she had loved and the man she had risked everything for. On November 26th, as Dana tried to pull herself together, a knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find 2 police officers standing on her porch, their expressions grim. Her heart pounded as she tried to understand why they were there. "Ma'am, we're here about Ryan Hale," one of them said, his voice gentle but firm. Confused, Dana stepped back, trying to process what he was saying. "Ryan? What happened?" The officer sighed, glancing at his partner before speaking. "Earlier this evening, Ryan Hale was found dead in his car on the outskirts of town. The circumstances are still under investigation, but it appears he took his own life." Dana's mind reeled, her knees going weak as she struggled to comprehend the words. the officer continued, unaware of her shock. There was a note found on the passenger seat. It mentioned a woman named Dana and hinted at a relationship he regretted. The words felt like a blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She staggered back, her hand pressed to her mouth as the weight of what she'd done settled over her like a shroud. Her affair had destroyed her marriage, her family, and now it had claimed Ryan's life as well. The guilt that had haunted her for weeks now transformed into a crushing despair, leaving her unable to stand. As the officers left, Dana sank to the floor, her mind a whirlwind of regret and horror. The choices she had made, the secrets she had kept, had all come at a price she never imagined. She was alone now, truly and utterly alone, surrounded by the ruins of her decisions. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a prison, each room echoing with memories of a life she'd lost forever. Thanksgiving passed in silence, a stark reminder of everything she no longer had. And as Dana sat by the window, watching the world go on without her, she understood that this was her punishment. She would live with the consequences of her choices, haunted by the love she'd thrown away and the life she'd destroyed. There was no going back, no undoing the damage. She would carry the weight of this tragedy for the rest of her life, knowing that she had no one to blame but herself.